Hello and welcome to Film Teach, self-education through films. If you're interested to know how films can be used to improve our understanding of everyday concepts and phenomena in a useful way, this audio series is for you. My name is Disha and I study one film at a time to distill from it practical and useful insights. Today's audio essay, the fifth one on the channel, is inspired by the film Interstellar. Depending on how one sees, conflict can be experienced as both a conceptual hero and an anti-hero of the film. Either way, I found it embedded deeply within the fabric of the story as it made its presence felt by distorting, shaping, reshaping the story's direction, form, and function. The story itself begins that way, with Earth in conflict with its inhabitants, a man in conflict with his dream and duty, a scientist in conflict with theory and reality, and those who are seemingly without conflict, that is Professor Brand and his protege, Dr. Mann, are as if embodying conflict itself by overestimating their control over life and its objective. For me, conflict is at the heart of the film. But this conflict itself has a palpitating center, a core from which the story springs forth, attracting and repelling both pleasant and unpleasant outcomes. This core for me is a sense of unfulfillment, which unfolds due to personal or circumstantial limitations of the characters in the story. None of them, at least for 99% of the film, seem to be living the life they wanted, or as they understood it. And it's understandable that this be so because of the life-threatening crisis humanity is shown facing in the film. The crisis is so overwhelming that it throws all sense of balance into disarray. And this lack of balance, as it pulls the carpet of guarantee from underneath humanity's collective feet, so to speak, brings to the fore unfulfilled, unmet, unresolved and largely overlooked sentiments. From a dream left unfulfilled in Cooper, a promise left unmet for Murph, a set of expectations rudely overruled for Dr. Mann and Dr. Amelia, or decisions met with regret by Professor Brand, the film's main characters, sooner or later, come to realize their personal sense of unfulfillment and act out of it. And I felt that the film does put unfulfillment under a microscope and can thus prove useful for my goal to examine it up close. In order to do that, I decided to pursue the following question. Can the film Interstellar shed light on ways in which unfulfillment can define our actions? The directions in which this question led me to proved very useful, and I hope you find it useful too. Insight number 1. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams can become the source of nightmares. Renowned Swiss psychoanalyst Dr. Carl Jung, who studied the phenomena of dreams and the power inherent in them, once said, quote, "The dream is never a mere repetition of previous experiences, with only one exception, shock or shell-shock dreams, which sometimes are completely identical repetitions of reality. That, in fact, is a proof of the traumatic effect." Unquote. Cooper is introduced to us via his nightmare. It was very realistic and undreamlike in its appearance, and I always believed that it was an exact replay of the events of the fateful day when Cooper lost control of his spacecraft and his job as a pilot. Now, with Dr. Jung's observation, I felt it safe to assume that in bearing likeness to reality, Cooper's dream was in fact a proof of the trauma he experienced with that loss. The vision of his nightmare seems to be the emotional equivalent of the pain, unhappiness, and unfulfillment he continues to feel 10 years after the actual incidents. He carries the longing to be a pilot within him, even when the opportunity to be one seems to have passed him by. This observation made me wonder about the extent to which a sense of unfulfillment can affect our inner being or wherever dreams come from. That we may put up a face during the day, but by making unfulfillment our habitat, we might mortgage the night, and its passage to pain and trauma seemed like a very unpleasant exchange to me. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams can make one desperate. While humanity was dealing with a collective nightmare, as dust storms and blight pulled the noose tighter around its neck, Cooper's nightmare remained personal. Even in the throes of annihilation, Cooper was traumatized by not being able to do what he believed he was born to do. The depth of his loss and unfulfillment went so deep that even the threat of global obliteration could not alter the course of his nightmares. They seemed to have developed a life of their own, fueled by Cooper's sense of loss and pain. So when he gets a chance to fulfill his desire, he takes it pretty much at the drop of a hat. Driven at this juncture more by his sense of unfulfillment than by the fulfillment he had come to experience as a father. This made me think that when our actions are born out of unfulfilled desires, they can make us desperate, too eager to seek solutions to a problem that we've engaged only on the face value, that by wallowing in unfulfillment, we can let our traumas get the better of us. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams can make us get carried away. Cooper and his sense of unfulfilled desires lived and breathed side by side inside him, as is shown to us via his nightmare. And the moment he gets a chance to fulfill a desire he's been playing a crutch to for the last 10 years, he takes it. He gets so carried away by this opportunity and the idea that they chose him, that he chooses to drop his current life like a bag of hot coals. His vulnerability and desperation was palpable and needed a small push to tip over completely. This made me think that when we are under the influence of an unfulfilled desire, we can end up taking decisions whose consequences we aren't very equipped to gauge or deal with. Cooper, who missed an entire lifetime with his family because he was given another chance to fulfill a desire he wasn't able to shrug off, made me think about the hold that not letting go can have on us. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams can make us overlook the pain our decisions can cause others. After the debacle at Miller's Planet, when Amelia asks Cooper why he couldn't tell his daughter that he was going to save the world, he tells her very clearly that as a parent, his job is to maintain his children's faith in life, even if annihilation was knocking at the door. However, when he tries to console a distraught Murph, his daughter, and is groping in the dark looking for ways to help her let him leave, he gets carried away and tells her that he might be gone for 23 years. For that one moment, he had completely become his sense of unfulfillment, and it took his 10-year-old daughter to show him what he said meant to her. This observation helped me understand how the desperation with which we seek to answer the burning fire of unfulfillment inside us can make us short-sighted, and how that same fire can burn our loved ones too. In short, a sense of unfulfillment can make us hang on to the wrong end of selfish. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams can make you overlook your duties. After losing his job and his wife, Cooper, with the help of his father-in-law, had built a safe haven for his 2 children. He was a good father and a good teacher to both his son and daughter. Yet, despite the love he had been able to give and receive from his family, a part of his heart belonged to what he could not be. And when push came to shove, he was both heartbroken and determined to pick a side, and as a result, leave his children in the care of his father-in-law. Now, the direction of the story was guided by the hands of the film's writer and director, but real life does not always bend to human will like that. It's to say that in real life, if a Cooper had left his children in the hands of an aging Donald, then there'd be always that possibility of that Donald succumbing to age and orphaning his charge. It should suffice to say that would be catastrophic in and of itself. From this observation, I understood that actions that stem from unfulfilled desires can be careless in their assessment of situations and create a very breakable safety net of false reassurances. In short, what I learned by observing Cooper's actions as they spring from a place of unfulfilled desires is that such actions can cause us and many others great and deep pain. Insight number 2. Actions born out of unfulfilled promises. Actions born out of unfulfilled promises can drive one away from oneself. Murph is introduced to us as a happy child, a curious child, who shares a close bond with her father. Her world is turned upside down when her father leaves their home to test humanity's luck on another planet. Abandoned, betrayed, and lost, without the encouraging and loving presence of her father, Murph retreats into herself and uses science as the high tower in which she lives and suffers alone. Miss Jessica Chastain, who plays Murph as an adult, feels the same way about her character's emotional state. In an interview she says, quote, "She had a traumatic event happen to her when she was a child, and her world ended. So she stopped growing emotionally from that point on. She's very angry, but she hides behind science and numbers." Unquote. Murph is shaken by her father's sudden departure and grows up believing that he left her to die. For 23 years, she carried the burden of this pain and the trauma of a promise left unmet. She turned to science as a refuge, probably even as a possibility to find her way back to her father, but in the process turned away from herself and created a life where she no longer belonged to herself. This observation helped me understand that when we are on the receiving end of an unfulfilled promise, our weight can wither us emotionally. It can give birth to questions that do not have easy answers, or at least no easy ways to find those answers, and that this sense of unfulfillment can take over our life and make us submit to a life of pain, sadness, and confusion. Actions born out of unfulfilled promises can cause loneliness. Murph was distraught by her father's sudden departure, and later by his failure to return. Her loss was far too much to bear for her, and it forced her to leave her home, her brother, her grandfather, and all semblance of an emotional grounding. As she turned away from everything, she also turned away from herself, and from a loved child, turned into a lonely individual obsessed with work. This observation helped me see how we can become emotionally detached from ourselves and from the ones we love when we pin all our hopes on one thing and find ourselves ill-equipped to deal with the consequences if the promises made to us go unanswered. Actions born out of unfulfilled promises can leave one hanging in a limbo. Murph knew she was loved by her father as much as she loved him, and this perhaps made it more difficult for her to understand why he left her and then failed to return as he had promised. Although the 23 years that she spends away from her father and her family are not shown to us, I felt it safe to assume that she spent a great part of it trying to understand what caused her father to leave. And when she learned that Professor Brand had lied, she wondered if her father lied to her too. Of course, with time, she is able to unveil the truth, but until then, her trauma eats her from the inside and leaves her hanging in the world, groping for something to latch on to. From this observation, I realized that when a promise made to us by a loved one remains unmet, we can find ourselves suspended in confusion and unable to find our feet in the void created by that sense of unfulfillment. Actions born out of unfulfilled promises can make one bitter. Murph, who was as stubborn as her old man, chose to not talk to her father for 23 years. This was probably her way of making him experience the pain she was going through. This also kept her from building any sort of conciliatory bridge between them, a bridge upon which that knowledge could have been exchanged, which could have helped her come to terms with his decisions. This observation showed me how an unmet promise can make us angry, and how that in turn can make us bitter, and then how our bitterness can keep us from choosing a way towards finding inner peace. In short, what I learned by observing Merv's reactions and actions as they spring from a place of unfulfilled promise is that those actions can make us emotionally fragile, tie us to our pain and loss, and turn us away from ourselves. Insight number 3. Actions born out of unfulfilled expectations can lead to regret. Dr. Mann thought of Professor Brand as a martyr who was ready to give up his humanity for the sake of the species. However, as is shown in the film, Dr. Mann's understanding of life beyond science cannot be trusted, whether it was applied to how he saw Professor Brand or himself. That is so because, as Professor Brand later reveals, that much like Dr. Mann, he too wasn't as strong as he had thought. Professor Brand knew his decision had doomed millions, including some of the best minds of humanity, that is, the mission astronauts. And as he lay waiting to meet his maker, so to speak, he had to shed the weight of this lie so his spirit could take off from his body when its time comes. I think it is fair to assume that he experienced some sort of remorse as the mastermind of that lie, of taking on a responsibility that his shoulders were not equipped to hold. So this observation helped me understand that when we feel that our humanity or our purpose is unfulfilled, we might experience pangs of regret. Actions born out of unfulfilled expectations can show us our true color. Dr. Mann, it seemed to me, had drowned the truth of his heart under layers of adulation and admiration he had received at the hands of his peers and himself. In theory, he was courageous. In reality, his courage was false and his cowardice was true. His mind had catapulted him to the status of a legend, but his heart, the tortoise in the race of his life, was yet to catch up. And when it did, it won. And in winning showed us that at his core, the core he ignored was made of cowardice and lies. The truth of his planet did not meet his expectations, but it did meet his true self. This observation helped me understand that when our greatest expectations are not fulfilled, we might come face to face with our inner truth, and that revelation, and if there's no way to run away from it, can turn us to madness, cowardice, and deceit. Actions born out of unfulfilled expectations can cause delusion. Dr. Mann is so overcome by his need to live, a need he thought he had overcome, that he was forced to face his worst nemesis, himself as he truly is. This realization made him cheat his way back into life, attempt to kill the person who literally brought him back from the dead. And instead of submitting and accepting his cowardice, his madness turned him against himself and others. From this observation, I realized that when we don't get what we expect, we can become mad, unreasonable, and frightfully stubborn. It can make us lose grip over logic, reality, and ourselves, and drive us to take actions which we would otherwise consider beneath us. Actions born out of unfulfilled expectations can bring rude awakenings. Although she looked up to Dr. Mann and her father, Amelia was different from them both. When she comes to terms with the reality of reality, she too is thrown into chaos. But unlike Dr. Mann, she finds restraint and accepts her limitations in front of nature. Still, her unmet expectations about the reality of the unknown do manage to throw her in a pit of despair. From this observation, I realized that sometimes revelations can drape themselves in a catastrophe, and also that unmet, unfulfilled expectations may in fact be a kind of catastrophe in themselves. In short, what I learned by observing Dr. Mann's and Amelia's reactions and actions as they spring from a place of unfulfilled expectations is that they can either make us a danger to ourselves and others, or help us learn to open up to life's uncertainties. The overarching question helped me look at unfulfillment, well, in the extreme sense that it's represented in the film, as a leech that can suck the blood out of life itself. It showed me how unfulfillment can have a history of its own, and how the intensity of its presence can define the course of our future. It seems to me that in cultivating or harboring or nurturing one's sense of unfulfillment, consciously or unconsciously, we ourselves line up our life and that of others with problems. Now, to summarize, here is a list of the actions and reactions that a sense of unfulfillment can lead to as explored in the film Interstellar. Insight number 1. Actions born out of unfulfilled dreams. 1. Can become a source of nightmares. 2. Can make us desperate. 3. Can make us get carried away. 4. Can make us overlook the pain our decisions can cause others. 5. Can make us overlook our own duties. Insight number 2. Actions born out of unfulfilled promises. 1. Can drive one away from oneself. 2. Can cause loneliness. 3. Can leave one hanging in a limbo. 4. Can make one bitter. Insight number 3. Actions born out of unfulfilled expectations. 1. Can lead to regret. 2. Can show us our true color. 3. Can cause delusion. 4. Can bring rude awakenings. So this is what I found out. What about you? Add your insights in the comments section, and if you found the essay useful, do share it with your friends and maybe let me know too. Thanks for being here. See you next time.